Welcome everyone here in Warsaw, Poland. Welcome everyone online. As I mentioned to the colleagues here, we have about 200 people online. It's wonderful to have Deputy Assistant Secretary for European and Eurasian Affairs, Robin Dunnigan, with us here. A couple housekeeping notes just for everyone, both here and online. This is a public event. So feel free to tweet if you would like. For people here, I mentioned that everything gets picked up on the mic, and I think that's enough for the housekeeping notes. Deputy Assistant Secretary, it's wonderful to have you with us. We are meeting in a very difficult moment. It's really an unprecedented crisis on our borders. It's a crisis that is playing out across the migration dimension, energy, information, and increasingly military. It's your first visit to Poland, and I will also want to give everyone here also your background. But it's really quite a time for you to visit. Let me introduce Madam Secretary, and I have notes, but I'll try to do it from memory. First, let me thank the embassy, U.S. Embassy in Poland, and especially big thank you to you and your team for working together on this event. We've been planning it for a while, but the timing is a bit more opportune or tricky than we ever thought. And Madam Secretary covers actually quite a difficult part of the world right now, because it's Central and Eastern Europe, but also Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova. She served as Charge d'Affaires and Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Austria. She's a career member of the Senior Foreign Service since 1992. Robin also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Department of State's Bureau for Energy Resources. So she's very familiar with energy diplomacy, which has a big angle in the current situation as well. And she speaks Spanish as well as some German, Turkish, and Vietnamese. So we'll have to work on the Polish as well. Robin, if I may, it's really, I wanted to just ask you to give us your view traveling through the region, current situation. I want to get into the conversation about Polish-US relationship, but it's really very hard to go into 60,000 feet conversation before we talk about what's going on currently. So how about we start with your view arriving in Warsaw just 24 hours ago.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me and for including me. This is my first trip to Poland in my current job, but I came several times before when I was covering energy, and it is a real pleasure to be back. And it's a real pleasure to do this, in particular with GMF. I think everyone's aware that we took one of the best parts of GMF, who is our new Assistant Secretary for European Affairs and is fabulous, as you all know. And one of the things that I particularly appreciate about GMF, especially here, is the convening role that you play in bringing voices together. So I think for me being here today, it's a really useful time for me to also hear from all of you and the viewers, because everyone's voice in this picture matters. And so I think it's a really good time for a conversation. So I'll try to be brief. So let me start by saying, first of all, our team at the embassy is fabulous, and Bix is a wonderful charge. And so you already have a good interlocutors on the ground. So I thought maybe I would start instead with going right down to U.S. Polish relationship or U.S. Central Europe relationship and sort of the worldview that President Biden and Secretary Blinken have mandated us to cultivate these relationships under. I'll start with what I think is one of the really guiding worldviews of President Biden, and that is that no challenge facing us today can the United States do without our transatlantic partners and allies. And that is evident in everything the president does when he confronts the challenges, be it COVID, post-COVID economic recovery, climate change, getting China to play by international rules of order, Russia, what we're facing today with the border crisis between Belarus and Europe. Any challenge like that, the president has said, we need to be with our European allies and we need to strengthen those relationships. And that's certainly how I came into this job and the mandate that I had from my bosses, from Secretary Blinken on down. And I think the second important worldview of President Biden that you saw when he was a senator and you saw when he was vice president, and we've seen it as president, is how important values are in our foreign policy. And a values-based foreign policy that celebrates and strengthens democracies around the world is essential to how we conduct our foreign policy. And, the real world application of that is that it underpins everything we're doing. I think most of you know President Biden's convening Summit for Democracies in December. And, the mandate from him, or the encouragement from him for all of us, is democracies are imperfect and we all need to take a hard look at how we can strengthen our own and help emerging democracies become stronger. So that's sort of the worldview that President Biden and Secretary Blinken have, espoused in all of us. And so coming to a place like Poland, you see so many of these factors in play. Poland is a longtime friend, an essential ally, an essential strategic partner. We have a relationship with Poland that defies the politics of the day and really essentially is from the ties between our people and our core values. I had excellent meetings today and yesterday with civil society organizations and business, the private sector, and then the full range of the government, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to presidential advisors, and meetings with some senators. So I think in all of those meetings, we all acknowledge how important this relationship is. So from the United States perspective, a strong, secure, healthy, vibrant, democratic Poland is essential for the region and for stability in the region. And today with the border crisis, that's absolutely apparent. And it's not just Belarus. Looking at Ukraine and the importance of helping Ukraine and being committed to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Poland's been a very key partner on this, particularly on energy diversification and the steps Poland's made. So we can talk about that. And let's talk more about the crisis with the border and how, I like to talk about it. It's not a Belarus-Poland problem. Mm-hmm. It's a Belarus-Europe problem, EU problem, and that is a challenge for us. It's a problem where Lukashenko is weaponizing, using migrants and human lives to create a crisis that has a real impact on the people on this side of the border, and frankly, the migrants who are in the pathway. So I'm happy to talk more about that too. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm also in listening mode. The more I hear, the better it helps us strengthen this relationship, which is already super strong.
Fantastic. Well, you raised lots of already important issues that I want to come back to. But maybe we will start. Maybe let's start the conversation about your understanding of the crisis. And let me ask, and then I really want to go to the first point you made, the strength of the relationship, but also that is very much based on values, and dive deeper a little bit on some tensions that could be there in a bilateral relationship as well. So help us understand your view, American administration view of the nature of the crisis. Some see it as a crisis that is perpetrated mostly by Lukashenko with the use of migrants. Some see a broader spectrum of across the domains and Putin really playing a key role in the whole play. To what extent, where do you put responsibility? How do you see, where do you see the main domains, and what US is doing already? Because we've seen, of course, visits of head of CIA, Mr. Burns, actually with Karen as well, Dunfried to Moscow, and then later Karen went to Kiev. Number of phone calls focusing on Ukraine mostly. I frankly hear a very disturbing reports, and actually I would say an assessment, and I wonder if it's an assessment that you would share, of really almost an imminent attack or a possible imminent attack of Russia on Ukraine. So if we can dive deeper a little bit on your understanding, as well as what US is doing and could be doing and is planning to be doing to avoid further escalation by our eastern neighbors.
So let's start with Belarus, and let's even back up from the border crisis. And first acknowledge that the important role Poland has played in giving the Belarusian opposition a home and a voice, by having many of the opposition members stationed here, which gets us to, Lukashenko and the legitimacy of that regime. We have repeatedly called on Lukashenko to have a meaningful dialogue with the opposition, to release all political prisoners, to treat all citizens with respect, and that includes civil society activists, it includes media, athletes, and also to work toward free and fair elections with international observation. And you know that we, as the EU, have implemented a series of sanctions in relation to what's happened in Belarus. So that's sort of the context in which you have Lukashenko, who we have to give the responsibility to for what's happening, of creating an irregular migrant path through Belarus to the border with Poland. And according to many reports, directing some of these migrants to the border and encouraging some of the situations that have developed. So what can we do and what are we doing? You've seen probably public statements of support and concern from the United States, from the president on down. The president discussed this with President von der Leyen over the weekend, spoke about it afterward, or maybe it was last Friday. On Saturday, Foreign Minister Rao and Secretary Blinken had a long conversation about the situation. We've joined with NATO, the NAC, as well as made a statement at U.S. OSCE, at the OSCE, raising our concerns, which I think is important. We've also said publicly, which we don't always do, that we are working with the EU on a subsequent sanctions package. So we are meeting regularly, and talking about this issue. I just had to answer some emails to help address the crisis and ensure that the crisis is understood in the context of, this is not a Poland border problem, that's Poland's problem alone. This is Lukashenko creating a crisis on the border with Poland and the EU.
And what is Putin's role in this crisis?
I don't want to speculate what Putin's role is, but I think it's clear that President Putin has influence and a relationship with Lukashenko and with Belarus, and could be, it has that relationship. And I don't want to speculate what the role is, but we can all speculate on what role Russia could play in a positive way as well.
Yeah. Well, So, this crisis is playing out here, just few hour drive from Warsaw. It's really, you can be on the border within 2 hours, but it's also playing out on the border of Ukraine, as we all know very well. In the spring, there was a buildup of Russian forces on the border. Then there was they left the forces left, leaving their equipment behind, and now they are back to a large extent. Secretary Blinken has been very open about talking about Russia not making further mischievous steps toward Ukraine. How can US and EU as well, but we can speak to the US, support Ukraine in a current very difficult situation?
We are concerned about reports of Russian military buildup around the Ukrainian border, and Secretary Blinken was very clear about this in remarks last week. We had a strategic partnership commission meeting with Ukraine, Foreign Minister Kuleba and Presidential Advisor Andriy Yermak were in Washington with quite a large team for a commission meeting that we had scheduled months before. We had actually scheduled it back when President Zelensky and President Biden met in the Oval Office on September 1st. And what I think Secretary Blinken was as clear as we can possibly be. He called repeatedly our support for Ukraine to be ironclad, it's the word he used, that our support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity is ironclad, and that we will continue to work with Ukraine so that Ukraine can defend itself against Russian aggression. Our partnership commission with Ukraine covers a broad range of issues, not just Russian aggression. It also covers rule of law, democracy, human rights, economic transformation. But I think at this time, when we know that what's happened in Ukraine, what's happening in Donbass, what's happened in Crimea, this is Russia purportedly annexed Crimea. That's where it starts, and Russia needs to be part of the solution. Russia needs to be willing to be part of the solution.
I'm sure we'll come back to it during the Q&A, because it begs the question, what if Russia doesn't want to be part of the solution? And we are there is a lot of experts in this city that know Russia even better, and they are here in the room, and there is our understanding of U.S. policy toward Russia, and also President Biden's meeting with President Putin, is that in many ways U.S. would like Russia not to be the problem that it has been for a very long time. But the challenge that we have with this, if I can speak in that sort of we way, which is the challenge I have, is that we really need to have a clear answer what we do if Russia wants to come and escape from the box of being a problem, and not letting US perhaps focus as much on Indo-Pacific as the events there require. So we can go into this direction, but it's I'm sure somebody will ask a really good question on this, because you also mentioned supporting Ukraine to defend itself, which is also a question of providing Ukraine with potentially further defensive weapons. I wanted, because I'm looking at our time, and we have great group both here and online, and we promised everyone that around 5:30 we'll turn to questions. But I wanted to go back to, since we focus a lot on security, and there's still more that we can talk about Polish-US security relationship, but I want to go back to the values questions. And you mentioned how important the Polish-U.S. relationship is for both of our countries. You mentioned how important values are for President Biden, Secretary Blinken. So if you could give us your assessment of to what extent Poland, I'll be blunt, is meeting those values, and how much of a tension or not it creates in this relationship that is of strategic importance and of historical value.
Look, I'll say let's take this in the context of Summit for Democracies, right? I mean, one thing we've said is we're not here to give report cards to countries. And we ourselves know that we can strengthen our own democracy. And I think it's important as we all take a look at the ways we can strengthen our own democracies, strengthen media freedom, root out corruption where it exists, root out avenues for corruption, that these are important questions that we don't have a perfect democracy among us. And so as we're bringing together countries in the Summit for Democracy, and we're including a group from all over the world, we're trying to include diverse countries. Not every democracy is invited and not all democracies are the same, but the question is, what can we all do internally in supporting other countries to do better? So I'm not here to give grades, but I will say that we believe that democratic values in Poland have a long history, a vibrant, open, very active media, a strong, independent judiciary. And so what we would do is encourage that those traditions be nurtured, and that media freedom is a core essential value of strong democracies. So it's a characteristic that we want to nurture and not limit. And everyone knows that the Polish government's having conversations with the EU, the Commission, and the European Court of Justice on judicial reform. And again, judicial reform, making changes to the independence of a judiciary, or making any changes that impact the judiciary, we all need to do very carefully, because they have ripple effects. These changes have ripple effects. And so I think those conversations between Poland and the EU and the Commission and the European Court of Justice are really important conversations to have.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, I'm going to play a sort of journalist here role to some extent.
In the spirit of that strong media freedom tradition.
Exactly. I mean, because it's been quite a ride over the last few months, also when it comes to media freedom. And you mentioned how important high quality democracy in Poland is for the US. So you mentioned areas that you would like to cherish the tradition, as you said. Let me ask about the tools and the actions that US is open to implementing. There is an aspect of dialogue in the Summit for Democracy, but is there anything else that US is thinking or planning when it comes to just supporting the good and vibrant democracy in Poland?
Well, one thing I would say is that this is not about Poland, but the United States does have tools. We have positive tools to support democracy around the world, and we've also developed tools to look at things like rampant corruption, authoritarian tendencies that we've used, visa restrictions, and the Global MAG Act. So we do have tools. In the context of Poland, I think it's also important for me to note that, I met with a lot of US companies, private sector, before I came here, and I met with the private sector, American companies, when I was here today and yesterday. And this is a really important point, I think. We have about 1,500 American companies working in Poland, huge foreign direct investment in Poland, huge creation of jobs, really important business ties that are good for both of our countries. And what I'm hearing from the private sector is some of their concerns about independent judiciary, about judicial actions, about media freedom, that those start to impact their investors and their companies, and their headquarters are asking them, hey, what's going on? So, that's something that I think is important to take note of. When you're hearing that from the private sector is, they want to do business in a place and are doing business in a place where they care about those values too.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you very much. I would suggest that we now open up for the conversation and a discussion. Because we have people online, if you could introduce yourself, speak relatively out loud. This mic should pick it up, but I will just repeat it for the audience online, and I will then make sure to also ask questions from the audience. Ambassador Schnemf, and then.
Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
I'll try to speak loudly.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming and for your wonderful speech. If I may say, welcome, Robin. We've met previously several times in Washington during my term. I was absolutely happy. Thank you so much. I'm grateful for mentioning the values first as a core issue in our relationship. Well, I remember from my job in Washington and talking to American senators and congressmen, I was using this rhetoric that the United States can do many business in the world and have friends and allies, but if it comes to the terms, if there's a real problem, there's only transatlantic relation. Why? Because we all understand the meaning of the words. When we say democracy, when we say the rule of law, tolerance, or minority rights, we all know, and we attach the same meaning, not the same way as I remember my conversation with one of the Cuban government representatives, and I said, well, about democracy, he said, well, we also have democracy, but ours is different. I said, what does it mean? Different democracy? There's only one democracy. We understand what it is. So it's so important. What we need in Poland, and you also mentioned some problems, is the civil societies, and to develop and to get support to the independent social circles that can play an instrumental role in strengthening the historical democracy, the tendencies that we're always proud of, like solidarity or tolerance. So what we expect, we have, together with Roman, actually, we founded U.S. Poland Democracy Council, which is to strengthen the relation between the civil societies. We will definitely return to you, just asking your support and your good word for our activity to strengthen the civil society in Poland, which is in need and in crisis. So thank you very much again for that.
Thank you. And it's great to see you again, Ambassador. And, one thing we always say is that our democracies are strong enough to take what civil society lobs at us. And when I was covering energy in the United States, I would do talks around the United States, and I got it from both ends, right? From one end, we weren't doing enough on climate, and I got it big on that. And then I got on the other end how the government was ruining U.S., domestic production. But the thing is, I needed to hear that from groups around the United States. We're a participatory democracy. Voices on all ends of the spectrum are important. Media is important. It's sometimes uncomfortable for me to sit in front of the media and get pummeled with questions, but we can take it. We're strong democracies. And so I agree. I think that that's something that we and our European partners, we share and we get. And, you can go to other places in the world and you talk about those core values, some places in Asia, some places in Latin America. It's not the same. It does bind us.
Thank you. Piotr Łukaszewicz. political insight. I'm going to do the intro, I guess.
Yeah, thank you very much. Madam Secretary, welcome in Warsaw.
Thank you.
We are sitting here in German Marshall Fund, the carrier of transatlantic relations and friendship. Your boss, your closest in Department of State, your co-worker is Mrs. Karen Donfried, former chief of GMF. And the future president of GMF, Mrs. Heather Conley, gave the expert capacity recently. She presented her expert views in the U.S. Congress regarding the situation in Poland. And she also mentioned that the state of democracy here in Poland, state of the values, liberal values in Poland, should be it's something to be watched and cared in the United States as well. But she also mentioned that U.S. should consider or reconsider military cooperation with Poland based on the observations that U.S. have U.S. representatives have in our country. That was something new, actually, in U.S. politics recently. Could you tell us how this?
I'm sorry, the incoming chair.
Incoming chair,
yes.
Incoming, yes. She'll be the president of the GMF. So, but my question is, how these voices coming from the civil society are perceived in the Department of State? How do you see this specific part of this relation between U.S. and Poland, military relations, in the broader context of values and the struggle for democracy in our part of Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. It's so I really want to reiterate, Poland is an essential NATO ally. And our security relationship with Poland and our support for that relationship is unquestionable. And it's what I meant to get at when I say that we have this broad, deep partnership with Poland, and we can have, in the same way our democracies can take it, our relationship can take having honest conversations in areas where we don't disagree. Where we don't agree. I have to tell you, when I was a diplomat in Europe during George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, I heard some really tough messages from European partners about what was going on in the United States. And that didn't mean that we didn't have a good relationship. So I think President Biden, just as clear as he's been about values, he's been just as clear about the importance of NATO to the United States, the importance of the transatlantic relationship, the fact that he chose someone, or Secretary Blinken chose someone like Karen Donfried, who spent her career as a transatlanticist, who spent her life's work to run our European bureau, I think is indicative that to put somebody like her with her expertise and her worldview and the position she's in really reflects that you can do both. You can have a strong, unquestionable security relationship and still have honest questions about how we can all do better.
Thank you very much. I also just want to point out that another person who was named but not yet confirmed is Julie Smith, an ambassador to NATO, also a former GMFer, but it gives us, if I may, before returning, you talked about the strengthening of NATO by President Biden and Secretary Blinken. Would you expect, given the real present danger that we are facing right now, and a different dimension to the conflict, really right now what we are seeing is something below the threshold of war? Would you expect strengthening of the eastern flank of NATO given the current events, and what would be the future of strengthening of the alliance coming from the administration before we go back to the
I don't want to speculate, and we never do, on specific actions of NATO, and nor would I want to speak for the other members of NATO. But I do just want to reiterate that it's it's an essential alliance for us. And Poland's role on the eastern flank is an essential role. And, you know, Poland has played such an important role on the whole range of issues. And it's why I mentioned energy earlier, because I think often people don't look at Poland and think, oh, Poland's played this really important role on energy. But in fact, Poland's been looking at energy security and energy diversification from a strategic security perspective far longer than many countries, than many of us were. So that was more my point.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I have Minister Czaputowicz, Roman, Robert, and then Professor Czaputowicz.
Yes, let me, Deputy Assistant Secretary, refer to your comments on the situation on the border with Belarus. So I agree that it is another issue, not bilateral one with Belarus, but also with the European Union. But how do you see the possible solution? Because now we have talks between President Macron and President Putin, and today the second talk between Chancellor Merkel and Lukashenko. And there are some voices here in Poland that it gives legitimacy to the regime, to Lukashenko, and it could be criticized. But on the other hand, it may probably weaken pressure from refugees on the border. And Poland is also criticized internally for not allowing them in to look at their asylum applications, because authorities think that most of them are not legitimate to that. So from American perspective, what would be a solution? It was also an important, I think, decision by the Commission to run some resources, money for refugee camps in Belarus to help these refugees, but it may also be or contribute to the longer staying of them in the countries. So do you have any thoughts on that, how we can resolve that issue?
No, and it's why I'm talking to a broad range of folks here in Poland, and we're coordinating very closely back in the United States. We are looking at options about, it's not a problem that can go away tomorrow, right? There are too many migrants that have been allowed to enter Belarus. It's going to require a plan and resources, humanitarian assistance, coordination among U.S. and the EU. It's going to require a lot of that in the coming days. What I want to be really careful not to do is frame the problem as sort of and I mentioned this before, is Poland problem, because Poland didn't get itself in this situation. It wasn't what Poland did to get itself in the situation. And I'm very sympathetic to the challenge at the border that the men and women who are at the border are facing. It's very hard to be where they are right now. I know it is. And none of us, we've all seen border challenges. The United States has as well. And so I think right now what we're focused on is coordinating with the EU, including with Poland, on a solution that is also humane, but allows Poland to have control of its border and the border to the EU, which we have to keep reminding folks.
Thank you very much. Roman, but if you can just introduce.
Yes, Roman Rego, former chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce, and I have a double pleasure because I had opportunity and pleasure to hear you earlier at the AmCham's meeting.
Yeah, sorry about
and
that.
I have some questions which are follow up to my questions. And what I love is the question regarding tools that the United States has to enforce or pursue values that are very close to the President Biden. And I would like to follow up on what Ambassador Schrepp said, that there are some people who are concerned about whether all the values that are being so close to the President Biden are being pursued here. And in terms of tools, 30 years ago, United States provided, being shining example of a democracy for Poles for many, many years, provided Poland with phenomenal and massive assistance. There was assistance from the U.S. government, from the U.S. nonprofit organizations, from the business community. They all came with main power, with great stream, way before Europeans came up to assistance in Poland, and provided great material for transformation. And I was wondering if one of those tools that you mentioned could not be something that reminiscence those 90s and the activities. Therefore, I have two questions. One is, well, first, the U.S., you mentioned the civil society, and our group, as Amado said, is of the opinion that the best way to alleviate the concerns about the rule of law and democracy in Poland is to support the civil society, people that are still fighting for it, and they are very good. They're very good. So my question is, have you had a chance to look at it, and whether you have some opinion on who in Poland is worthy of the assistance? Second, is the assistance possible in the same way, which means that would the US government not only provide money and moral support for those activists, but also would give a nudge to the American foundations and concerned with democracy to help Poland? And third is whether or not you have some experiences in this area to share with us.
Thank you. So I always love when we have policies in the United States that have strong bipartisan support. And I think it's fair to say that there's very strong bipartisan support for the transatlantic relationship, and in particular, Central Europe and our relationship with Central Europe. And Congress actually earmarked $20 million in the last budgetary round for supporting civil society organizations in Central Europe. So we're working closely to come up with a plan for spending that money in a way that meets the intent of Congress. And so we're in close coordination with Congress, and we've just put out some requests for information. So that's something we'll be doing over the coming months together with USAID and the State Department. And I think that's a really important sign that Congress is saying, hey, these are organizations that are worth us. It's not that Europe needs $20 million from the United States. That's not the point. The point is that it gets us all thinking about how important these institutions are in Central Europe and where can we continue to create ties between the U.S. as we did then. So thank you for that point, and something we're looking at.
All right. Thank you very much. Before I go to Łukasz, let me go to Veronica.
Okay, my name is Veronica Laputska. I'm working with the GMF, and I'm originally from Belarus. So my questions will be about what is happening at the borders. Thank you so much, Deputy Assistant Secretary, first of all, for being so eloquent during this very challenging conversation. So my first question is, as a partner and as one of the main voices of NATO, are you happy with the reaction of NATO, what is happening at the Belarusian-Polish border, but also what is happening near the border of Ukraine? We received growth of kind of Russian presence. And my second question is about instruments the US could perhaps somehow use as a diplomacy, perhaps in Iraq and Syria and in Turkey, because as we know, European partners have done a lot there in trying to persuade the governments there to avoid and somehow to prevent people from going from those countries to the border. Have there been any efforts of similar kind from the US, or are you foreseeing anything like this? I would be happy to hear this. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's a very important question so just to repeat, like, this is not a regular migration path. And there was a concerted effort, and we could talk probably for days about how that happened, to open up new pathways into Belarus for migrants. And one of the things that we and our European partners have looked at is we need to stop that irregular flow. It's not good for anybody. It's not good for the migrants. It's not good for Europe. And so some of those flows have already, the pathways have been closed, and we're continuing to have conversations with countries to further do that. And I think that's very important and something we're coordinating with our partners on and with the EU on, including with Poland. So that's very important. And another thing that I think is very important, and are we happy with the reports of Russian aggression and military buildup? No, because we want a stable and predictable relationship with Russia. It is our desire to have a relationship with Russia where we can cooperate, where it's in everybody's mutual interest. Yes, we need to compete, and yes, we need to have hard conversations with Russia in cases like this. This is not where we want to be. We don't want to be in a situation where we're talking about Russian military buildup. But we have made clear and will continue to make clear that aggression, like we saw in 2014, like we could have seen in the spring, that we will respond to that with, in a real meaningful way. And so, no, we don't like to see it. And like I said, we want a stable and predictable relationship with Russia. President Biden has said that from the beginning. So, yeah, no, we're not happy.
Thank you very much. Łukasz Kulewski, Institute of International Affairs.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to connect a couple of dots from your initial remarks. One about the strong relationship and support for Ukraine, and then the second one about the strength of the Polish-US relationship, and ask you about the possibility of a triangular cooperation or trilateral cooperation, US, Ukraine, Poland, because it seems to me that we often think in terms of bilateral relationships, whereas maybe there are some specific areas or proposals that either you heard or you put on the table that would help us coordinate our efforts better. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and thank you for that. And I think it's something that would be really interesting to think about more broadly. And like I said, I think on energy security, this is a place where Poland started to diversify its sources, getting an FSRU, getting an LNG terminal, developing nuclear capabilities, looking at, Poland started taking steps that really helped it not be dependent on Russian gas. And then, in my view, started playing a role to get some of its neighbors to also be thinking about longer term. We need to choose to buy certain sources of the gas and not be forced to. So that's a place, for example, where I think Poland's been very helpful in conversations with Moldova, for example, during its negotiations with Gazprom in the last couple of months. It's played a very helpful role. And so that's one example where I could see some triangular conversations being really worthwhile. Look, I'm a diplomat. I believe dialogue is always good and helpful. So, usually the more the better, not always, but the more the better.
Since you mentioned energy security, and then we have a question from Marek, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about one aspect of energy security. You mentioned that Poland is diversifying its routes and sources, but clearly energy security is playing out in this broader conflict. If you could give us a little bit, given your experience in energy diplomacy, your view how energy supply is being used. That's sort of, if I have one question. And the other question, the elephant in the energy security room is the Nord Stream 2. And of course, we saw the pause in certification yesterday. I wonder, and I think it will be very interesting to hear your view, whether you think this was a legalistic move or actually a political signal. But the real question is about the view of the United States of Nord Stream 2, especially in the current situation, especially that the certification is not finished. We know of a bill that would introduce further sanctions on Nord Stream 2 is being processed. So where are we there from your perspective on Nord Stream 2? Should this be part of our Western leverage back on Russia in the current conflict?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about it. Because I know that the rollout of the U.S.-German joint statement on Nord Stream 2 didn't reverberate well here. But I do want to say that I spent 4 years working on slowing down Nord Stream 2 when I was in my previous job together with Amos Hochstein and partners here in Poland and other partners in Europe. And I was there in Turkey. It was in Istanbul when then Vice President Biden first used the words, Nord Stream 2 is a bad deal for Europe. It's a bad deal. And he says that to this day. So it's not that the United States suddenly supports Nord Stream 2. That's not what happened. It's that by July of this year, it's clear the pipeline's 95% built. So the question then was, what do we do moving forward? And we came to this agreement with Germany and issued this statement where it puts us on record, us and our German partners, to say we're watching to make sure that energy is not used as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And if energy is used as a weapon, then we, Germany, will take steps to ensure that we respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we'll commit new funds, significant new funds, to helping Ukraine diversify, which it needs to do. And I think Amos Hochstein subsequently came out here, and then the president and Secretary Blinken asked Amos Hochstein, who knows energy better than probably anyone in the State Department, to come out here and work with Poland and work with others to implement the deal. So we talk about energy and security in Europe sometimes, and we get wrapped around only talking about Nord Stream 2. And I think it's really important to look at the broader picture. And the broader picture is we've been supporting for decades diversification in Europe, starting with the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, a oil pipeline. From that to supporting new LNG terminals around Europe, to opening the Southern Gas Corridor, to supporting that. Poland's also played a very important role in that entire process. So we are in a better position today. Europe is in a better position today than it was a decade ago. But Europe is still dependent. Many countries in Europe are still very dependent on one source of natural gas. So that's a project that we, and I say we because I think Europe's energy security affects Europe's national security, and that affects our national security. So that's a project that we still have ahead of us. But the question is now, is Nord Stream 2, is the opening of Nord Stream 2 essential to European energy security this winter? The answer is no. Putin has already said he has gas he could send to Europe. So send it. There are pipelines that are open and running and not at full capacity. Use those pipelines and send it. And Secretary Blinken said last week, we've seen the playbook of weaponizing energy. We know that playbook and we're watching out for it. So.
But have we crossed the threshold? That would be a big statement if you said yes. So, but
and I'm trying really hard
I know.
to escape this hour without making.
But I have one question online actually about this too. And if you can just comment on the German decision, were you surprised to see this delay in the certification process, or were you expecting or something along?
Yeah, I don't really. I've been trying to talk to a few analysts and understand it better, because I think there are several layers to. You mean the decision on this? Because I'm not sure if that's something that was triggered by a legal change by the company, or if that's something. So I haven't fully unpacked it yet, and I need to talk to people who are smarter than me before I comment.
Sounds good. Sounds good. The coincidence of time is very interesting, but it's true that it's not been accompanied, for example, by a political statement. Let me go to Marek Świerczyński from Polityka.
Thank you, Michał. Thank you for this opportunity. Another question, departing from the current crisis and looking into more midterm and long-term perspectives. We are talking at a time where both the United States, NATO, and Europe are discussing its strategic directions and sort of the future defense and security policy. So I would like to hear from you. What is the U.S. contribution? I know that the United States is involved in the European defense matters, but I would like to hear more. And a related question, you are well aware about some concerns and voices that are raised in Europe about the future possible changes in the U.S. nuclear posture. What is your reaction to those concerns? Thank you very much.
Very important questions.
Look, I'll just answer the parts that I can, either because I don't know the answer or because I can't say it here. The parts I can is that we're working together with our NATO allies on this revising our strengthening our strategic concept to reflect some of the realities today. And I think by next June, we'll be in a place where we'll have a strategic concept that does reflect those realities. And I think we're having very good discussions on those areas. On EU defense, and what we've said is we need strong NATO-EU cooperation. Then we can stop talking about it theoretically. What does EU defense mean? And rather, let's talk about it practically. Are there areas where EU defense makes sense, regionals? And in that case, I think what we've said is yes, there are areas where it makes sense. We want to continue to be able to participate and have access in procurements, in security initiatives. But I think that it's a really important conversation, and it's come up also in the context of AUKUS. And was that a signal that we're looking to the Indo-Pacific and kind of leaving behind our NATO alliance? And I think it's fair to say that we, and Europe too, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we can, our security, having that security arrangement does not diminish our security relationship here in Europe. And there's a recognition that EU having security relationships in the Indo-Pacific, in other regions, doesn't diminish the strength of NATO. And in fact, I think in the complexity of the world in which we're in, it strengthens both of our security. We don't have a singular interest in Indo-Pacific security. I think that's also an interest for our NATO partners. So
we are almost at the hour, so let me just see if there's anyone in the room online. I asked the questions, and so let me finish with a final question that sort of goes along the line what Marek mentioned. We are also waiting for U.S. global posture review, and I sometimes hear good things in terms of increased U.S. presence. Sometimes we wonder, given the tensions also in the Indo-Pacific. President Biden just held a summit with President Xi, where Taiwan didn't seem to go into particularly great direction. So my question is the speed of, on one hand, in the sort of Polish-US context, is the speed of implementation of the enhanced defense cooperation agreement, finishing Kręcikowo, all the things that we have bilaterally, but also your expectation about the timing of the publishing the global posture review, but also, whether should we expect, without going into too many details, thumbs up, good news, or bad news when it comes to this balance between Europe and Asia? Because as you said, US can walk and chew gum, but this is pretty big gum over there in the Pacific, and turns out that Europe is certainly not a quiet place anymore. So if you could give us a sense of sort of with the wrapping thoughts as well, because we are coming to the end of our discussion.
I mean, my answer on global posture review is a really easy one, which is it's a significant review, and one person will make the final decision on that review, and that's the President of the United States. And so far be it from me to speculate or, and I will also end with saying there are other things we never speculate on because it just gets you into hot water. But as you know, we have this phenomenal embassy team here, but we also have an ambassador who's been named by the president. If he's confirmed, Mark Brzezinski, somebody who, if the Senate confirms him, brings a wealth of knowledge, deep ties and bond to the country. And so before you get a name, you never want to speculate on who the president will announce. And then once you have a name, you don't want to speculate because the Senate has to confirm him. So he is not yet, Mark Brzezinski has not yet had his Senate hearing, but he is, that choice reflects the president's commitment to this relationship because he chose somebody who brings with him a wealth of experience, a serious approach, a deep affection and bond with Poland. And I think that sort of is a good summary of how the president thinks about this country.
Right. Well, thank you very much. This is such a good way to finish our conversation. Fingers crossed for Mark and his Senate confirmation, and frankly for many other ambassadors as well. We look forward to having them all on this side of the Atlantic.
But I would say, I would note, Poland has the chairmanship of the OSCE next year, and we're sending out a fabulous ambassador who has been confirmed
Absolutely.
to U.S. OSCE.
Yeah.
So Mike Carpenter. So you'll have a great partner there.
Absolutely, and Mike is a good friend of Poland as well, and of GMF as well. But one of the few people that speak Polish very, very well.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling, being with us, and really we got into both the big picture and the weeds of the relationship. The values part of it, the energy part of it, the security part of it, in a certainly very trying times. Thank you for visiting Poland, and thank you for visiting with us here at GMF.
Thank you for having me.